Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today on our EAStalk webinar with Sigurdur Bogason. Sigurdur is VALUMICS project coordinator, and the European Aquaculture Society is part of the project. Today's topics is VALUMICS Horizon 2020 project, understanding food value chain and network dynamics, the Salmon Case study. Sigurdur has a PhD in food science and technology from Oregon State University, with additional qualifications in nutrition and statistics. He has worked more than 30 years in the food and aquaculture industry, in fish factories as fisherman, food technology expert, scientist, and company manager. My name is Anna Veskovic, and today I will moderate the session. EAStalk webinars last for 45 minutes with 30 minutes of presentation time and 15 minutes for questions and answers. After Sigurdur's presentation, you can be unmuted and ask your question directly, or you can send me the question and I will ask the question for you. Dear Sigurdur, many thanks for accepting our invitation and for willingness to present the presentation about VALUMICS project. Please feel free to start with your presentation.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. I hope that I'm being heard clear and brightly by everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to the EAS network and others that have signed up for the EAStalk event. It's always of interest to join with people, but now more with the COVID-19, we have started to train ourselves to speak to screens, and hope everybody will appreciate that, because usually I'm more used to speak to audiences. So bear with me if I make mistakes in my presentation talking to the screen. Going to the contents of the presentation. The VALUMICS project, what is it about? I will shortly describe that a bit, then move on to the Salmon Case study, but also reflect back to some of the issues that we are working on as well in the project, not only salmon, because we have some commonalities with other food systems that we are studying. So the focus of the presentation is the title of our project, Understanding Dynamics of Salmon Food Value Chain, the impacts, how it impacts on sustainability, fairness, integrity, and resilience. And we actually have some other issues that we work on, but this is the scope of the talk. We will discuss the analysis of governance, the actors, decision-making, and behaviors in the system, material flows. We did also environmental impacts, a life cycle analysis, economic analysis, price transmission, market power, profitability, efficiency. We did work on risk and resilience, and then we are now moving on towards the future scenarios, which is actually the output end of the project. So coming back to VALUMICS. VALUMICS has 20 active participating organizations. We have 18 European partners from 13 countries. We have 2 Asian partners, the CAO, or Agriculture University in Beijing, and the Economics University in Hanoi in Vietnam. So they do complementary research on food value systems in their countries, and in some cases they reflect similarities to what we're doing, but also expand our global view on the situation. And you see the logos of the partners where they are spread. We have 2 in Iceland, and then we have more or less across Europe a number of partners. We have 2 as well in Finland, and as you see, European Agricultural Association is also a member of the consortium. So shortly on the objectives, there are more, but these are the kind of core objectives of the project, is to provide tools and approaches to enable decision makers in the food value chains to evaluate the impact of strategic and operational policies. It's aimed at enhancing fairness, integrity, resilience, and future scenarios of sustainable food value chains. But this is a quite interesting. Anna, I see you have not muted your sound, so possibly my video is not coming in. Doesn't matter.
Apologies.
Yeah. Okay. Which is interesting, and I'll come back to that because the shifts in policies, they are quite pronounced in terms of what's going on in Europe, and it affects the whole different sectors, agriculture and aquaculture and fisheries as well. So how do we construct the project? This is one way of viewing our project. We have phased work. We did start by groundwork analysis in phase 1, looking at the governance policy, the system analysis, looking at fairness, sustainability, resilience, and integrity for the different food value chains that we chose to work on. We looked at the key indicators and material information flows. Where can we get data and information? Then we are also being quite busy in the second and third year on the economics work, transmission of market power, persistency, efficiency, profitability, and we are also in the case study mode as well, and we continue with the case studies. We are also working on consumer behavior with one work package dedicated to that, and how to influence consumer behaviors. Then we have quite a bit of modeling work as well. We have the food system model, which we are working on based on kind of a hybrid with system analysis and agent-based modeling. We also done a risk and resilience model based on preparing for an APM modeling. But then we have done also a logistics model. So these explorations are phase 3, and it's moving into the scenario phase, where we are looking at the different scenarios, both the market-led, global, public-led, regional, civil society-led, and local, for example, and the transition pathways. This all will accumulate into phase 4, where we try to synthesize the outputs and discuss them with the policymakers to hopefully give them tools to react to what's happening in the food system. So we started with 5 case studies, and we are currently working on all these issues in dairy cows to milk, beef to steaks, and raw tomato to processed tomato, and to wheat to bread. The beef to steaks we put a little bit to the side to focus the work, and in this presentation we are discussing the salmon case study. We have employed a multidisciplinary approach in the project. We have economists, we have engineers, we have different types of social scientists. So we have a very complex kind of structure and different languages that people speak. Some people come from a purely academic perspective, others have industry background, and others have links to the governance and policy kind of making situation. We have associations. We have the Food Association in Spain. We also have the Food Association in northern Italy, which is working with the University of Bologna on the tomato case study. And then we have European Agriculture Association working with us on disseminating and informing on the research from the salmon case study. So this is kind of giving you the broad spectrum of how we have faced the project and what we are trying to do. And we are starting very soon we are in the last year of the project, the synthesis work, how to accumulate everything and go through this, and how to create this kind of drive and delivery of policy phase activities. Just to mention that if you want to read up on the project and what we have been doing, we have in European Agriculture magazine a recent article in 2019. If you're not a member of the EAS, due to the requirement of European Horizon 2020 projects to have everything available in the public domain, we have actually uploaded this article into the VALUMICS website. So you can take a look and read about the way we are working in the project to get further background. So what about the outcomes of the VALUMICS? How are we going to work towards this? We basically look at the project developing a suite of tools, because we don't know exactly how far we get with the different tools and how useful the end result will be, and how to compile it into a composite kind of guidance and useful system. We have done the governance analysis of food value chains, and I will talk a little bit about the governance analysis of the salmon chain. And if you want to listen to the issues on tomatoes, we will actually have a presentation as a webinar on 21st of September in Spain with the FIAP, the association there, with the Italian partners and a number of other players in the project. So that will be announced very soon. We have done the life cycle assessment, more or less to make sure that we had the right foundation, no big discoveries there that have not been published before, but we have a paper in the submission phase, and there are interesting new things there as well. But so when I talk about LCA a little bit later, please remember that we are not doing anything kind of great in new innovation. We are just confirming the background to our change. Then we are working and quite busy on the consumer behaviors. That work has been slightly delayed because of COVID-19, because we had to postpone certain activities. We have one big retailer in the project, Rewe in Austria, and they have had to readdress how they want to do the behavior intervention analysis. So this is one of the issues that we have with COVID, but hopefully that will be online as with new timeline plans later this autumn. Then we did the framework of material information data collection. This actually was run and managed by Synchronization Ocean in Norway. So they started on the salmon chain and then did the similar work for the other case studies. So it's an event-driven process chain, materials and event flow analysis. I will show you a output of that for the salmon chain a bit later. And as I mentioned, the models, we have a high ambition to create a food value chain systems model with a dynamic approach, but we use that for analysis and understanding of the systems, and then more or less are focusing on the agent-based models, APM, using the system dynamics approach to substantiate the decision issues in the chain. And we have also chosen to focus the work on the fairness issue. So that's a certain priority in the analysis that we are doing, to understand how we can model fairness. And we have currently basically two teams, one working on the wheat to bread chain as a base background, and then also on the salmon chain. So this probably will come together into a model later in the project. Then we had a risk and resilience modeling framework done as a hybrid discrete event analysis that will follow on into the APM. This was done by UCD in Ireland, but still they chose to work on the salmon chain. I'll come back to the reasons for why we are working quite a bit on the salmon chain, even more than we anticipated at the conception of the project. Then we did the logistics model.
Sigurdur,
yes.
Apologies. It seems that the slides are not synchronizing. I can see, I'm not sure on which slide are you at the moment, but I can see VALUMICS outcomes.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yes. There should have been probably pressed twice, because there is a animation that should come on your slide. I didn't. I pressed twice.
No problem.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
so
I
went too fast. I'm just giving you the background of the different, and we are currently not publishing all of this. We are creating quite a bit number of internal deliverables that will then be focused into the reporting to the public domain later on, into papers or into policy advice. So we have a series of internal deliverables that go to the Commission as well. And currently, just to come back to the logistics model, which I was trying to say, is that again, this model work done by University of Newcastle is a mathematical model, but the selection there was the salmon chain. And I'll come back to the reasoning behind that as well a little bit later. The transition pathways to sustainable food value chains, which is the core of the output expression of the project. We are doing scenario analysis to 2030, and then backcasting again, and also we look towards 2050. There is a rationale behind all of this, we hope, and I will now, I think, jump into a little bit on the simulation and what is the agent-based modeling that we are trying to achieve, is to create a tool, because policymakers, they lack a whole chain overview of the food system, and this is a quotation. Therefore, it's difficult to predict the effects of policy implementation beforehand. And the simulation modeling is good to try to prepare and test policy interventions. And we have to recognize that the food systems are complex and adaptive systems. So if you put in a policy measure or change an issue, the system will adapt and find a new best way forward. So any intervention in the system is not going to hold forever. It's adaptive and changes. So it's very complex to model. The agents, the people in decision power, they impact the system with their actions and reactions. So the food system has a background in food legislations and standards, but it's also adaptive and it's smart. So I think any model will always have its limitations. Just to remind us about the phase we are basically now moving into phase 3 and then onwards to phase 4, the policy and synthesis, trying to take out all the information and put it into context of what we are trying to achieve. On the modeling of fairness, which is actually the chosen concept that we wanted to really look into, because there are a number of issues that we have to think in terms of fairness, and we are thinking mostly in terms of economic fairness. You could say there is also an issue of social fairness, there's an issue of environmental fairness, but we are working mainly on the economic measure of fairness. So that's part of the modeling, and this is actually from analysis on the salmon chain. There's a small diagram there, how the prices are being set by the retailers. I'll come slightly back to that later. And going back to the case study now, the farm salmon value chain. Just to give you a little bit of background to that, because I mentioned that we started with 5 case studies. We're more or less focusing now on 4 of them. And many of the people working on different case study work actually very soon found out that the data richness and access to data from the salmon chain actually presented a new opportunity. Many of these partners had only been working on agri chains before, and it was like Christmas for them to find out that they could get data that they are not used to get access to in the agri chains, and that may be an issue in terms of the food system. Why is data not universally applicable to all the different case studies? Each country has their own kind of nuances, and the European Union has a food kind of on the common market. there should be a kind of one set of playing rules, but there is differences. In part, this is related to the Norwegian system of having everything on the table. All the information is more or less in the public domain or accessible by request. This is not the case in many food value chains, and we can discuss that possibly. Why is that necessary to keep all this kind of information that potentially should be in the public domain due to transparency issues? We can discuss that because DG Agri is pushing now for more transparency as a means to, for example, increase fairness. The VALUMICS case study, what we worked on is the farmed salmon from Norway to EU. So we mapped the separate chain value and decision chains. We did the environmental and social LCA on salmon as well as two other chains. And we did the governance analysis, market power, and profitability and price transmission has been done as well. We're trying to understand how the distribution of value added along the chain. We did the logistics modeling. We did the risk and resilience assessment for the ABM plant modeling, and agent-based model to capture agents. So, and we are also looking to the policy interventions of future scenarios into 2050 with the perspective of agriculture farmed salmon compared to the land-based agricultural systems. So I think this project has many kind of new ways of looking at the food system as we combine both agri and farmed salmon in terms of understanding the system. Coming to the material flow analysis, this is work from SINTEF on salmon, and it's no surprise that the big volume of the salmon material is flowing out as whole head-on gutted salmon. So that's the bulk of it. But we can also see from this diagram that there is an increased flow into the fresh and frozen fillets from Norway. So that is increasing. And we also see that Europe is the main market, but Asia is there as well. Whether it's growing depends on policies as well. But this is the Norwegian salmon material flow in 2018. Just to the same data represented in a slightly different view. We see the breakdown into different products. So 85% going as fresh, chilled, whole, gutted. And then we have the fillets, which are kind of the growing product as well. And we see the breakdown as well on the right side, the countries that are the big importers. And we can see that Poland is a big importer, France and Denmark. And coming back to that, one of the issues with the salmon chain is that these countries actually are secondary processing the salmon very often to steaks or smoked salmon. And it's an integrated chain from Norway, so many of the Norwegian companies own subsidiaries in these countries, but not necessarily only there, but it depends. So you have to remember that even though Norway is a member of the European Economic Area, they are not member of the European Union. So there is a slight of kind of a situation there in terms of how the secondary processors in Europe look at the supply of raw material from Norway. The same is for fishery products from Iceland or Norway. So it's kind of a dual situation there. We can discuss that as well. Coming to the life cycle analysis, as there are no surprises there, the feed production is the key in terms of what is being having an impact on it, and the grow-out phase. And then we look at the primary, secondary processing, and the distribution and consumption. And the results are no surprise. If you include air transport for fresh, it has a significant effect on the total impact. So transportation becomes a key part. But then, as Usually, we look at the feed production, and these are the hotspots in all types of farm production, which have an impact on climate change. So on-farm operation is also an important contributor to the social indicators. And we looked at, there's a postdoc student, we have just submitted this, he has submitted this paper. We looked at injuries, and that links to transport, which is kind of one of the new things. There are a number of fatal incidences in the transport of salmon. So that's a social impact that is new in this analysis, or not maybe new, but at least interesting research. So I ask people, when we have the paper, it will hopefully be accepted, then more information should be readable from that paper. Going to the governance framework, the global value chain, we base our analysis on the framework from GREFI that was published in 2005. And the governance structure and inter-firm relationships in food value chains are explored in a literature that has been published by Barling and Gresham in 2019. It's an open deliverable report from VALUMICS. It's on the VALUMICS website. And actually, we have more information coming as well from that team. And we'd say that food value chains carry, with respect to governance and power structure, contractual agreements, and pricing practices in general. The salmon chain was actually done by Synthep Ocean and University of Iceland, looking at the governance issues. So I appreciate my colleagues, Guðrún and Matri, on this. Matri at Synthep and Guðrún at University of Iceland. So this represents their kind of work there. And we look at the concentration of mergers, the producer-driven value chain. Supermarkets are the lead firms. I think this last point is something that everybody in the farmed salmon chain understands. And the range of inter-firm relationships from markets to the hierarchy where the relational and captive structures can be identified. We have the free market exchange, where products are sold on spot market, a trend of long-term contracts, in particular between the long vertically integrated companies and retail or large secondary processors. And we have to remember that the salmon chain from Norway is, at least so far, producer-driven. It's owned by the big Norwegian companies, and they have stake in many of the European secondary processor firms, even though we have different aspects to that as well. So if you look at the global value chain and the vertical governance of the chain, which is another paper from GREFI in 2016, if you look at the diagram very quickly, we don't have to go through it. You can take a look at it later on. So we have the global lead firms like Mowi and others, and the supermarkets, the big players. Then you have the international organizations and regulations, standards, trade agreements that actually come into play. And you also have the international civil society that has an impact on this. But you could say that the cluster firms, the aquaculture primary processors and traders, create a cluster. And in Norway, you could say that the local civil society, national, regional, and municipal governments have an impact on this cluster. And then you have the environmental regulations. So the governance is influenced by network of governance, contracting, and informal relationships. So it has many aspects to it, and it's an interesting study in our perspective. And you can read. I'll come back to a paper that we published in a couple of slides that will give you more access to information. And coming back to the unfair trading practices, why are we looking into this? It is because DG Agri was driving through the European Parliament a new directive, because they were worried about the smallholders and the small farmers in the EU and how they actually can combat the big players, because they are also being pressed by the lead retailers. And are they being treated fairly? they don't have the kind of market power as the big Norwegian producers of salmon. So it's kind of a situation where you have dispersed small farmers compared to the big supermarkets. So the EU directive that actually has a 2-year adoption into national legislations or regulations, so it's coming in 2019, and is to protect the weaker suppliers against the buyers, primarily farmers and the cooperatives, and also those actors in the downstream supply of agri-food products. Even though it's written for the farming, land-based farming, it will impact on the salmon value chain as well. Because when anything is changed into food, it becomes food on the market, and by the end of the day, it is a food product. So there are common features in the different food value chains that we are studying. I think I will have to speed up because I see my time is getting I talk too much. But anyway, the fairness in the food value chains is topical and policy relevant. So we are trying to understand the complications in this through simulation modeling. Just to quickly go through this slide, this is a directive for protecting weaker suppliers and medium and SMEs. And what I wanted to point out on this slide, I mentioned before, is the market transparency. The lack of information on market developments. It's more pronounced in the agri-chains than in the salmon, at least the Norwegian salmon chain. So the price transparency is to be made mandatory along the food value chains. It's part of this directive. So where can you find more information about this? I think I'll go to this. We have 2 publications there. There is one publication. It's in the European Agriculture magazine. It's written in volume 10, I think. No, volume 44 too, in September 2019. So it's the level of trust and the occurrence of unfair trading practices, opportunistic behavior. So I urge people to go and get this article and read it. It gives you further background on where we are at the moment in this work. And just to give you from our analysis stakeholder statements, we did a survey. If we take 2 examples, is the value distributed fairly? This is a Norwegian feed producers. No, not at all. All the value is not distributed fairly. The agriculture producers hold the power and press the price from the feed producers who are competing on the market. Another one, secondary processors are stuck in the middle of the chain and are reliant on farmers, primary processors or wholesalers for raw materials where they buy on the spot market. They are vulnerable when prices on the spot market are high and have little influence to negotiate the price with retailers who normally operate at a fixed margin. So these are just 2 examples of statements. So opportunistic behaviors. The main risk here is the price volatility. Can people work at a long-term fixed price contracts, or are people dependent on the spot market, or do they combine both? Price is for sure one of the most important factors and will increase a supplier's perception of fairness. And as on the slide, demand is more than supply and trade. It has been favorable for the agriculture producers in past years. And we have to remember that the supermarkets are lead companies, and they favor the large companies because they can secure them with continuous supply. So, and also we have to keep in the background, we are not researching this. The price fixing allegations have been made against Norwegian producers. This is still in process, and this links to this fairness issue as well. So I think we, as well as you, are looking to what comes out of this. And we are doing quantitative measures of fairness for the simulation modeling. we actually chose to look at the gross profit margin in the food value chains, because price is one of the key points, and the influence of market power and how it's being used. We are using the learner index for market down analysis as one of the analysis tools, because it provides an estimate of market power in an industry. It measures the price cost margin through the difference between the output price of a firm and the marginal cost divided by the output price. And we have from our economics teams Lukas Sekura in Prague, who's working on this analysis. The quantitative measure of fairness, the overall aim is not to measure absolute fairness, rather to ascertain the transition towards a fairer outcome, because it depends on the perspective of the individual or the company, where along the chain they are, what they deem being fair. So we stay with the European Parliament depiction, how they look at this. So it's of how much deviation away from good commercial conduct the chain is basically showing. And we also have a debate ongoing, because we have the new farm to fork strategy, part of the Green Deal of the new Commission, and we have debate in Brussels between DG Agri on the situation, because they want to have more subsidies and support to the small farmers. So that's always the same debate on the budget in Brussels. And then we have the play of the Blue Economy report as well. The sustainability dimension, is that an important one? Is it the social? How are we looking at fairness? At the moment in VALUMICS we are looking at the economic fairness. But you have all different aspects of the situation, and this will hopefully in the project during our analysis and synthesis reflect on some of the key issues on sustainability. So economic analysis is a work in progress. I have to say that our colleagues at EAMO in Germany and in CSU in Prague and University of Newcastle, that are the core of the economics team, and this is data from them, and they actually plan to present many of this information at a conference that was supposed to be in late August in 2020 in Prague, but has been delayed now 1 year due to COVID-19. There may be partial dissemination of these results through webinars in the autumn. There's one being planned, I think, for early November, will be announced soon. So part of this will be coming out as well. So I praise my colleagues at EAMO, like the WorkPax 5 leader, Ivan Durek. So bear in mind that this is their result. And there is quite a bit of market imperfection, and the degree of market power shows positive correlation with firm size. So the small firms have a different situation compared to the large firms. So we are looking at the policy scenarios, how to really enhance sustainability and fairness in food value chains. Just to give you a quick review of that. The salmon value chain analysis, the price transmission and market power. Export prices drive the price development, no surprise there. High market integration is evident, which points to a high market efficiency, and very fast price adjustments to shocks in the salmon chain. Considerable high degree of market power for some companies on Norwegian producer market, but we see signs that the market is becoming more and more competitive. So there might be changes in the future, and some adaptation might be foreseeable in the salmon industry. So the expectations are that there will probably be a further market integration, and level of prices depend on supply and cost shocks on Norwegian producer market. Reduction in market power will have an impact on price, and thus profitability development on the downstream markets. We could say also that it's not on the scale on the slide. Scale efficiency. Large companies have optimal size because they operate with a constant return to scale. And also there is technical change in the charts. Large companies have positive technological change. They can take up new competitive technologies which are prohibitive costly for the small operators.
Sigurdur,
yeah.
May I just ask you something? If it's possible to wrap up the presentation, we are past the time.
Yeah, I only have 3 more slides.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you. Just so you know. Yeah, thank you.
So I will skip the summary, and if you share the presentation, it's basically that there are a number of things that are under analysis still, like is the Russian ban having effect on market power or not. So we are working on this, and the economics team will be presenting the full results in due course, possibly later this autumn. And just to wrap up, looking ahead in the project, the scenario developments. This links to the work in Work Package 8. We have been working with 3 core scenarios, and as I mentioned before, market-led, public-led, and civil society local. So global, regional, and local. We are also working with the Eat Lancet Commission on healthy diets from sustainable food systems, which I think was good for us because they did not really recognize that farmed fish was part of the future diet. So we've been basically kind of pushing in that they look at that as well. So that I think was a good thing from our case study work. So our partner Italy in France is leading this work. How could we see transition pathways to develop sustainable consumption in the future for this change? So this is a work in progress. We have been running a number of stakeholder workshops to get the inputs from the industries in this, and this is a work in progress, and more outputs coming. So work with us if you want to be participant in workshops that we may be hosting in the autumn. Most of them probably webinars. Please sign up for our stakeholder platform. And it's there, staying in touch. You have the sign up, so sign up for the stakeholder platform. And you can also follow us on the different social media. So this is my last slide. I'll just quickly show you. We have some selected references, but I think this is the last thing I'll say. Thank you very much for listening, and Anna, take over and go for questions.
Many thanks, Sigurdur, for giving really great presentation on the VALUMICS and explaining a bit more to our network about the project and the salmon case study. The first question we have is from Amina. I will unmute Amina right now.
Hi, thank you, Anna. Thank you, Mr. Bogason, for your great presentation. So please ask you a question about. We know that planning aquaculture, especially for example the salmon case, is focusing on making a high profitability of markets. And we saw it from your presentation. How about the emerging markets like African market? Are you aiming to plan models in order to make food and alimentation insurance in these countries that are suffering from famine or other problems? Thank you so much.
the focus of the modeling work and analysis work is to assist the decision makers, both in the industry and at the policy level in governments and things like that, that they can see the impact of a decision. And if the impact of a decision, for example, would impact on developing nations' access to food, that might be involved in the analysis. But we are not in specificity working on that aspect of it, because we're looking at the food system as a whole. And we have global as well and local, and we're sure that if there's an impact anywhere, like salmon is importing quite a lot of feeds from developing countries, it will have an impact if people change or reduce or even increase. So the ramp up of a certain kind of feed might impact access for people in famine. So any kind of policy decision will always impact someone. There is no action taking without reaction somewhere in the system. How far we can get within VALUMICS to have a comprehensive model is another story. We are striving to do this, but we cannot assure ourselves even whether we can have a functional model by the end of the project. We are just doing our best to get as far as we can, and there might be a need for follow-up work to take in this aspect that you mentioned.
Thank you, Sigurdur. Thank you, Amine, for asking the question. The next one we have is from Valeria.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Hello, everyone.
Yes, we can. Hi.
Thanks, Mrs. Viskovic, for the organization, and thanks, Bogason, for the presentation. Well, actually, I would like to ask, since one of the hotspots is that we have seen in the slides is the use of feed, so the feed for the salmon aquaculture, which actually is not related to salmon, just to salmon, but in general to aquaculture. And considering the recent legislation in 2017, which didn't receive so much attention in research and development, how VALUMICS is considering the insect processed as feed, and if it considered the promotion of it, not only for the benefit of economic, but for the circular economy, for a more sustainable use of feed. Thanks.
Yes, we've a number of internal workshops discussed the new proteins and like insects, and this has been actually a part of our early system analysis. So we had chain analysis of insects as potential feeds or even direct human consumption issues. So we did a survey on that, and so we have looked into it. It's not one of the major themes we are working on, but we certainly take that into consideration, because with the scenarios in the future, we need to look at possibilities for new types of feeds or foods for human consumption with the changed diets that are probably on the horizon.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Valeria. In case you have another question, you can ask it now or you can ask it later. I would like to also say to everyone, in case you would like to ask the question, you can send me a message down below. Another question we have for you, Sigurdur, is given that you have very different food chains, have you seen major similarities between the food chains, and what VALUMICS has found to be the common issue between these chains?
There are a number of commonalities and also differences, but like on the governance situation, we had a slightly different governance outcome of the salmon chain compared to the agri chains. There was a difference there. But in commonality, it is the pricing of commodities that actually are the key. And we have discussed as well in our work the impacts of subsidies, because, for example, in at least in Norwegian salmon chain, there are no subsidies. So it's a market perfect system in terms of that the market decides what is viable or sustainable in economic terms. But the agri-chains are, as the debate I mentioned between the Green Deal, where the consumer would put in the driver's seat, food to fork, farm to fork.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have the agri-industries that actually are dependent on subsidies, and this is being discussed in all meetings and taking aspect because, for example, in the dairy chain, we discovered very easily that there is no profit for the dairy farmer. Only way they survive is due to the subsidies. So one of the Eat Lancet decision to work on is how much does the industry need to reduce production of dairy, as basically milk powder. Is that sustainable or not? Because it's fed by subsidies. And this is the big question in terms of European policies. And it's not for us poor scientists to decide what is reasonable, but it's definitely an impact issue for the agri-chains.
Okay, thank you so much. The second question we have for you is, how do you see the salmon value chain evolving or changing over the coming years? Do you think it will stay as it is now, or do you think it's going to change as the times goes by?
I'm sure it's going to change because depends on economics again. If we see that the land-based farming will become more economical or even competitive in the future, that then the salmon will be produced close to the big markets, the big cities, depending if they have enough water and energy. So it might become that the dependence of the market firms might be totally different if we have a salmon production very close to the big cities in the future, and how the cities are going to change in terms of using water, energy, and produce food for sustainable consumption. That might actually impact, and I'm sure that the people in the farming industry are looking at ways and means to be part of this change, because there is, in my opinion at least, there's definite changes that will need to happen in the time 2030 to 2050 to keep on feeding the global population of 9 billion people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sigurdur. This was also our last question for today. In case you have any other question for Sigurdur, you can send me an email, or you can send it directly to Sigurdur's email, which you can see on the last slide of the presentation. I would like to thank you all for participating in our webinar. The video will be published online soon until the end of this week. I will send you a link of the webinar in the following email. I would like to mention that today we will also record an EAStalk podcast with Gudrun Olafsdottir and Matir Tako together with Sigurdur Bogason. The podcast will be about the VALUMICS project, and it will be published soon as well. Our next webinar will be on September 1st at 2 o'clock with Andrew Rickerson. Andrew talk will focus on InnovaFeed, a scalable insect solution for sustainable seafood. I would like to also mention on the end that in case you would like to propose any topics for a future webinar, you can send me an email on anna@aquaeas.eu. Thank you very much, Sigurdur, for giving a really excellent presentation today. The feedback on your presentation was really good, and thank you once again for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for sharing your time with me. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.